Okay, all right. So are you ready to start getting things on? Listen, you're free to come and go. You're free to move in and out, whatever.
No problem.
You can watch this in the other rooms. But when you're in this room, we have to be completely quiet anyway. So I hope that everything's okay.
I don't mean to be too draconian, but it is hard to concentrate when people talking, you know, so thank you. Do appreciate a bit of silence.
Okay.
Yeah, part two, everyone. So yeah, I mean, we talked about Freemasonry and gave you kind of a very, very, very basic overview of what Freemasonry is all about. And now we're going to come to part two, which is the Royal Society and its links into Freemasonry and how it's affecting all our lives, basically. The Royal Society came about in the mid-1640s. By the way, I'm speaking from notes. There's no PowerPoint, as I said at the beginning. I'm speaking from my notes because my presentation collapsed on me. It came out in the 1640s, and the idea was to discuss the ideas of Francis Bacon, who was an originator of the New Atlantis, which was the esoteric plan at the time, to develop the American colonies, i.e. what are now the United States, as a perfect society. And this they called the New Atlantis. Okay. Now, two of the original members of the Royal Society, a guy called Sir Robert Moray and another one called Elias Ashmole, whose name lives on in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. They were already Freemasons by the time the Royal Society was formed. And the society originally met weekly to witness experiments, scientific experiments, and to discuss what would now be called scientific topics. Although science then was much more broadly defined, far more broadly than today, and included such subjects such as alchemy and astrology. Sorry, shut that.
You tell them, John.
I will. And as the membership of Masonic lodges grew during that time period, and it grew rapidly after 1717, Freemasonry and the Royal Society became almost intertwined. They became melded together, as many of the senior members of the society also held senior positions in the proliferation of Masonic lodges. Indeed, several were closely involved in promoting new lodges and developing the constitutional basis of the new Grand Lodge. Okay. By the end of the 1700s, particularly during the presidency of a guy called Sir Joseph Banks, who, as they all were, was a Freemason. The membership of the Royal Society had, by this point, become a mix of working scientists, guys who did it for a living, and wealthy amateurs who were potential patrons and could help fund scientific research at that time. Long before any government would consider funding scientific research, by the way. Okay. Now, several of these patrons were also Freemasons. Stop me if you've heard this story before. And would meet with scientists both at meetings of the Royal Society as well as in the various Freemasonic lodges. And as the professionalisation of science developed in the early 19th century, when it really began to take off, professional science, fellows of the Royal Society began to be elected solely on the merit of their scientific work. Now, new types of science developed at this point, and scientific education expanded with the growth of university science degrees, and it began in the mid-19th century, it began to be taught in schools. And Freemasonry also attracted previously non-Freemasons who became scientific fellows. You know, in the and the growth of Freemasonry lodges was enhanced by drawing membership from particular universities, even hospitals, and other specialist scientific establishments. Some famous early Freemasons were a guy called Pythagoras, although Freemasonry wasn't actually called Freemasonry at that time, because Pythagoras lived a long time ago. There was a guy called Copernicus, Galileo, Janus Kepler, and Isaac Newton, who's probably the most famous of them all. Now, Nicholas Copernicus was a Renaissance mathematician and astronomer who formulated a model of the universe which placed the sun rather than the Earth at the centre of the universe. Because up until that point in time, till Copernicus came along, everyone believed that the Earth was the centre of the universe and that everything, the whole of the heavens rotated around the Earth. But of course, Freemasonary and the Royal Society soon put a stop to that. You know, they can't have the truth getting out, and it had been believed for several millennia prior to that that the Earth was the centre of the universe, as I say. Okay, so we'll leave that there for the moment. Come back to that. Galileo Galilei, who was an Italian astronomer, you've probably all heard of, physicist, engineer, philosopher, mathematician. Now, he played a major role in the scientific revolution of the 17th century, and he's been called the father of observational astronomy, or the father of modern physics, and the father of science. His contributions to astronomy included the telescope. Okay, so he invented the telescope, and he also made various other astronomical discoveries through use of his telescope, and amongst which were he discovered, for example, the 4 largest satellites of Jupiter. Okay, and which are named the Galilean moons. Okay, and he was a major proponent, champion, if you like, of the Copernican system, the model that places the sun at the centre of the solar system. And Janus Kepler, he was a German mathematician, astronomer, and astrologer. He was also a key figure in the 17th century scientific revolution, best known for his laws of planetary motion, based on his works. He wrote several books about it, and his works provided one of the foundations for Isaac Newton's theory of universal gravitation, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. Now, arguably the most prominent of these people was Sir Isaac Newton, who I just mentioned. He was an English physicist, a mathematician, and he was described in his own day as a natural philosopher, as I mentioned earlier in the talk. Scientists weren't scientists in those days, they were natural philosophers. And he was widely recognised as one of the most influential scientists of all time, and a key figure in the scientific and mathematical revolution of the 17th century. His book, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, what a mouthful, was first published in 1687, and this was the foundation of classical mechanics, and he also made lots of different alleged contributions to optics, and he shares credit with another guy, Leibniz, for the development of something called calculus, which, if any of you did A-level maths at school, you'll know what calculus is. Absolute bullshit, basically. Sorry. So this work that he produced, called Principia, it formulated the laws of motion and universal gravitation, and it dominated the scientific view of the physical universe for the next 3 centuries. He did lots and lots of work, and all of it was Freemasonic influenced. Freemasonic, the model of the universe, the model of the Earth that we have today is all Freemasonically influenced bullshit, basically. Excuse my language, anybody who's offended, I do apologise. Newton became president of the Royal Society in his later years, and he also served the British government as Master of the Royal Mint, incongruously. Yeah, so he was knighted by the British Royals. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about the guy. Anybody who's knighted obviously suggests close ties to not just the monarchy, but the entire establishment. Anybody who propounds the ongoing agenda is going to get knighted or in some way recognised by the royals because he's serving them, basically. He's serving them the Freemasonic agenda. Okay. And anybody, of course, who goes against that agenda, they're either ignored or vilified or just basically taken out. That's another story for another time. Right, now interestingly, unfortunately I can't show you this, but Newton's coat of arms consists of a pair of human leg bones crossed on a black background. Very, very similar to the pirate flag, the so-called Jolly Roger, but without the skull. Okay. Now, it's probably needless to say to you enlightened folk out there, but that coat of arms is extremely suspicious, of course, given the similar symbology which is used by secret societies such as the infamous Skull and Bones Society of Yale University, and to which many prominent politicians and businessmen belong. Now, let me just pause for a second there from my notes and just explain to you a little bit about my views about heliocentrism, which is the idea that the sun is the centre of the solar system and the Earth is just revolving around the sun as a globe. Okay. Now, I believe that, well, I don't believe, I know that Freemasonry has propagated the idea that there's like a threefold system in place which explains exactly what is going on in the universe today. And all of it is utter bollocks as far as I'm concerned. Okay, those three things that they promulgate are the Big Bang Theory, the theory of evolution, and the globe Earth. Now, why do they promulgate that so strongly? Well, I believe it's because by doing so, this is the only way that their model of the universe will stand up to any scrutiny whatsoever. Okay? If they told us the truth, that evolution never happened, we were all created at some point, that the Big Bang never happened. I mean, the Big Bang is so ridiculous. I mean, this is another talk for another day. But the Big Bang theory is exactly that. It's a theory, and it's a really insubstantial one. The Big Bang, just to give you some background, was promulgated by a guy called Georges Lemaitre, who was a Belgian Jesuit priest. Okay, so what does that tell you? A Jesuit priest. Yeah, exactly. And the reason that they came up with the Big Bang theory was just to explain away the idea of how the universe and we as a species came about, and everything else in the universe, obviously. But first of all, the Big Bang totally destroys what mainstream science calls the First Law of Thermodynamics. Okay, now, the First Law of Thermodynamics says that matter cannot be created or destroyed. Now, what does the Big Bang do? It tells us that, first of all, there was nothing, and then this nothing exploded, and we and everything you can see in this vast universe was the result of it. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm a skeptical person anyway, but that to me is just bullshit. Okay, then furthermore, they had to come up with a theory, of which Darwin was the frontman for, of evolution, to further explain how we came about. And also, again, I won't go into massive detail about this. I mean, these are subjects for other talks at another time. And then, of course, the ridiculous globe Earth theory as well, which is just, I mean, people call me a loony flat earther. I am a loony flat earther, I admit it, but I don't just believe it because I'm a loony. I believe it because there is so much evidence to show that that is absolutely the truth. And again, I won't go into massive detail, but I'll just reiterate those facts. Those three things prop up the model of the modern scientific world. Okay, all of which, in my view, I'm not saying I know everything, because I don't, obviously, but all of which prop up the mainstream view of what we are meant to believe. Right. Okay. So back to the story. Okay. So Yeah, one of Newton's close friends was a guy called Galilei, who was a French Freemasonic Grandmaster, and he was commonly regarded as the father of the Grand Lodge system in Freemasonry. But in his capacity as president of the Royal Society, Newton nominated this guy Galilei as the curator of experiments in 1712. And he would also later become president of the Royal Society after Newton. And according to the London Museum of Freemasonry, Galilei was both a leading Freemason as well as an important publicist for Newton's scientific ideas. By the way, that just reminds me of something. You're probably most of you are aware that Newton was the guy who discovered gravity. Yeah?
He's an actor. They're all actors.
Of course they are.
They play on the world's a stage. Freemasons are all actors. They lie. I've just finished the conversation. Oh, can I ask you? Royal Society, right? You've got the Royal Society, right? Then you've got the Carnegie Foundation.
Yeah.
Right? Foundation is what things are built on,
Yeah.
aren't they?
Yeah.
And then you've got Freemasonry.
Yeah.
And the Freemasonry was Freemasonry that was actually found. There was a cataclysm in the First World War was to cover it up. And the Freemasons lied.
Oh, that's a shock.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Am I close?
Yeah.
Yeah, thought so.
Yeah, can we keep questions to the end? We'll
Yeah.
ask questions at the end.
Well, there weren't questions, were there? I just
Yeah,
wanted to
just
put
there,
these.
yeah. That's fine, yeah.
Okay, now go back to gravity, right? Gravity, if you ask a scientist today what gravity is, oh God, nobody really knows. We don't know what it is. It's just this invisible force that makes everything stick to the earth. We don't know how it works, but it explains why we have a globe and people underneath in Australia can walk about upside down and yet not fall off. And it explains why the water and the oceans underneath the earth don't fall off. We don't know what it is. It's just a mysterious force. I call bullshit on that as well because it's quite simple to explain. Okay, let me find something that's not going to create havoc when I drop it in. Okay, so if you drop that, they tell us that that was gravity that made that fall. Again, bullshit. All it is something called relative density.
Drop in the water.
Which is easy to explain. Okay, because that book, that little notebook, is denser than air.
Drop in Mercury.
Yeah. Now Newton's apple that fell on his head, you've probably all heard the story about the apple falling on Newton's head, and that's how he discovered gravity. Well, that's very interesting, because if Newton's apple had missed him and fallen into the pool that it was sitting beside, what would have happened? It would have fallen into the pool and it would have floated. Because an apple, it would have fallen from the tree because it's more dense than air, but when it hit the water, it would have floated because it's less dense than water. It's a simple explanation, but they have to contrive all this utter nonsense about gravity being this incredible force that nobody understands, because they have to use gravity to prop up the globe Earth and the universe as they tell us. Because without any of that, none of their model of the universe works. So they have to contrive all this nonsense. I call it like patches, in logic patches in theories, and that's all they do all the time. They patch logic into theories upon theories that don't hold water, pardon the pun. But yeah, sorry, I'll get that up again. So that's all that gravity is, it's relative density. I mean, how does gravity explain, for example, the fact that, yeah, it holds us on the ground, they tell us. How does it not hold smoke? How does it not hold butterflies from fluttering in the air? How does it not hold birds? No, if gravity was strong enough to hold trillions of tons of oceans on the underside of the Earth, how is it that it's so strong to be able to do that, but yet it cannot prevent a butterfly from flying into the air? It's all nonsense. None of it makes sense. They know it, but they patch it up. They come up with all these outlandish ideas to cover all that up. Anyway, I'm kind of digressing. I do apologise, but I just thought that was an interesting aside.
It's why they get them while they're young.
Absolutely, yeah.
Your first books.
Yeah.
Your first toys. your rainbow colours,
Yeah.
your numbers, everything.
So this guy, Galilei, he was someone who was not only a close confidant of Newton, who was, master of the Royal Society, but he was responsible for publishing and promoting Newton's scientific material, and he was also a Grand Master Freemason, tasked with keeping Freemasonic secrets. Thus, there's plenty about which we should be very suspicious, some of which I've just covered, given the enormous influence of Freemasonry in Newton's life. And looking at the bigger picture, if, for example, you were the British monarch at the time, ruler of all he or she surveys, then, and you wanted to spread lies in order to deceive and thereby remain in control of the world and what you regard as being the ultimate truth, then the following would probably be very close to a perfect solution, and here it is. Firstly, create an official, royal endorsed organisation that can effectively manipulate and monopolise the dissemination of all information regarding what you would wish for the general public to believe is the scientific truth. Yeah? Okay. So now, here again, unfortunately I don't have the slide, so I'll have to read it out, but here is an excerpt from the Royal Society's website, basically, and reading between the lines of what this says. Okay. Now, Royal Society reckons that it is promoting science and its benefits. In other words, in my view, publish material that presents only your own desired narrative while censoring or ridiculing alternative scientific views and dissenting scientists. Okay. It also says it is in the business of recognizing excellence in science. In other words, in my view, publicly and officially recognize only your own agents, stroke scientists, and ridicule and deny the oxygen of publicity to those who disagree with their often disingenuous pronouncements. It also says that it's supporting outstanding science. In other words, it's offering funding only to scientists who are prepared to follow its own narrative and only produce results that conform to its agenda. It also says it is providing scientific advice for policy. In other words, influence politics and law using only your decreed science, for example, green energy policies. Okay? Now, it also says that it's fostering international and global cooperation. What wonderful words, aren't they? So in other words, it's heavily promoting a system where a central governmental body controls the flow of scientific information, also known as the New World Order. Okay, and lastly, it says that it promotes education and public engagement. Again, wonderful words. But reading between the lines, what that means is it controls the education system and publishing sectors in order to successfully indoctrinate all of us with its own narrative of history and science. Okay. And it also ensures that no one except those of their choosing and approval, based on their loyalty to the agenda, are allowed membership to this official organisation. Anybody who goes against any of the edicts of the Royal Society doesn't stand a cat in hell's chance of ever being admitted.
Sounds really talking about Tavistock.
Huh?
Tavistock?
Well, yeah. Okay. So it also heavily promotes the work of those scientists who agree to fall into line with their own agenda over and above everyone else in this royal controlled or sponsored scientific journal that they produce to ensure that their work becomes widely accepted over time as the absolute truth, where in actual fact most of it is just nonsense, just promoted for the agenda, for the sake of the agenda. And then that's the case no matter how ridiculous or unscientific that may be. And lastly, it sets itself up to ridicule and censor any scientist or any layman, such as myself, who present material that opposes their chosen narrative. Over several decades and even centuries, the science and proclamations of what is or is not the truth, found in all textbooks, and almost certainly will always certainly be those of your choosing, or their choosing, in fact. And subsequently, in the fullness of time and over many generations, they hope that the alternative, truthful information will be forgotten and lost to posterity. And this is why I write books like The Falsification of History and The Falsification of Science, to keep the real truth alive despite all the propaganda to the contrary. I mean, have you ever wondered, for example, why a brilliant scientist like Nikola Tesla, until recently, was completely ignored and forgotten?
I've never heard of him until about a couple of years ago.
Exactly, yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
And I used to study electrics and read old electrics books.
Yeah.
18th century. Never heard of him.
Can throw that.
Also the old encyclopedias.
Yeah.
Britannica 17th century is a good one.
Could you just throw that open? First of all, who's heard of Nikola Tesla?
Yeah.
And who would only heard of him recently?
It was created by them, I think. They changed the history. They rewriting it now to cities.
So, yeah. So, go back to what I said. Have you ever wondered why such a brilliant scientist, until recently, has been completely ignored and forgotten? It never appeared in any scientific textbooks, certainly not when I was at school. Whilst a whole plethora of Freemasonic scientists who only stole each other's ideas, such as, for example, Thomas Edison, and spread lies, Newton, Kepler, Copernicus, they appear in our textbooks and in our worldview all the time. But the sad truth is that the vast majority of people who pass through the education system never consider whether the facts they are repeatedly told are true or not. I mean, that's true of me, all the time I was growing up. I'm sure all of you were the same as well, until you kind of woke up to the realities of the world. You don't realise until you actually start to think independently that all this stuff is going on. And, the natural tendency is for us all to implicitly trust the establishment. We can't, it's a case of cognitive dissonance at first, isn't it? We can't actually believe that we've been lied to at first, because there's so many lies that we're told. But there's this tendency to think, lied to us, would they? And so I kind of get that people out there, the mask wearers and the compliant people, I understand why they're like that, because I used to be like that, and I'm sure you guys all did as well at some point. But the only difference between us and them is that we've all woken up now, and they haven't.
I think you're taught not to think.
Yeah. So the end result of all this, anyway, is that if anyone questions anything they're taught, then they must be crazy. I've been called crazy so many times, but I wish I've got a pound for every time I've been. Because, of course, the Royal Society and the establishment would not deliberately lie to us, would they? And they couldn't possibly be wrong, could they? Well, okay. So, anyway, in 1660, the Royal Society was founded by Freemasons. In 1663, the Royal Society was awarded its official name by a royal charter by a Freemason. And in 1666, note the number there, 666, an apple fell on the head of one of those Freemasons. And in 1666 also, that same Freemason invented calculus. And in 1687, that same Freemason went on to publish his Principia Mathematica, that became the bedrock of science for the next 300 plus years. As I say, note the 666 number, which is the satanic number, the number of the beast, as we all know. Many people, would probably believe that it's just a coincidence that the organisation responsible for promoting that gravity story was created just a few years before Newton randomly discovered it. However, Others, such as we good people in this room, might view it with some justifiable skepticism and conclude that the Royal Society was created specifically for the purpose of introducing the public to such ridiculous theories. Surely not. You know, these were already in the planning, of course, so long before the alleged Apple incident. And of course, the Apple incident never really happened. It's just
if the door burst open now and the guy came in with an apple and said, "This fellow here, I've just discovered gravity," what would you say to him?
fuck off, I'm talking. I know what you mean. So, you know, just think about this for a moment. What are the odds that someone new just happened to stumble upon what's considered to be the most significant discovery of modern science, and it created a revolutionary form of mathematics at around the same time that the organisation in charge of promoting this said discovery was created? Chance? Nah. Now, just to summarise that, a group of Freemasons instigated the Royal Society, which is an acknowledged and endorsed organisation to proclaim upon what is true and what isn't true in science, and that they and only they and their extremely carefully selected friends and colleagues can be part of. And then immediately afterwards, these same Freemasons just happened to make a whole sequence of historical discoveries that laid the foundations of science for the next 300 years or more. Is that a coincidence? No. And to further summarise, these Freemasons, all allegedly highly intelligent geniuses, or so we're told, are credited in textbooks kindly provided to us by other Freemasons in the guise of trustworthy publishers who are also Freemasons, outlining the motion of the planets and modelling how the solar system works. Now, let me just summarise how that model works. Okay, the model can be summarised as follows. The Earth, according to them, this is, not to me, is a spinning ball rotating around an enormous ball of exploding gas at 66,600 miles per hour. Okay, our solar system, including the Earth and all the planets, whirls around the centre of our galaxy at 220 kilometres per second, or 490,000 miles an hour. The Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour on its own axis at the equator, but we can't even detect that motion because the ball on which we live is so large, they tell us. Okay? Now, people further away from the equator spin more slowly than 1,000 miles per hour, but feel no noticeable difference no matter where on this fictional ball you are. And somehow, this vacuum in space doesn't affect life on Earth. The first thing that struck me about the globe Earth model was, they tell us we're surrounded by this vacuum of space. So, my first question to that would be, well, why doesn't the atmosphere just dissipate?
Where does all the hydrogen go?
Exactly. Why does it not just boil off into space or whatever? There's nothing to stop it. I'm digressing slightly. And what prevents us all from flying off the ball Earth as soon as it's spinning so fast, just like water on a spinning tennis ball? And what they tell us stops it is gravity. Gravity is a theory. Yes, it is only a theory. The theory of gravity. And it took Newton 3 whole volumes, even bigger than mine, believe it or not, to explain. And even then he had to create a whole new form of mathematics. And his first big volume began with the words, if. Now the pole star, Polaris as it's called, has stayed exactly above the North Pole for thousands upon thousands of years, despite all these different movements, these really fast movements in 4 different directions at once. Not just the Earth, not just the solar system, not just the galaxy, but the whole of the universe is in motion, they tell us. And yet the pole star has stayed exactly above the North Pole for thousands of years. So it's very, very impressive indeed to me anyway, that all these geniuses managed to discover all these facts. I'm sure you agree. And, I'll just remind you of those 666 numbers as well. Now, the list of fellows of the Royal Society who were Freemasons numbers 8,000, which maybe you think, well, that doesn't sound an awful lot over 3 centuries. But it's actually a staggeringly large number because the membership is limited to 1,600. Okay. So over a long period of time, and some of them were members all of their lives, don't forget the humans kind of 3 score years and 10, or sometimes a lot more than that. Only 1,600 are allowed to join the Royal Society at any one time. Obviously, clearly the Royal Society was founded by Freemasons. I've probably covered that to absolute boredom now, but it's continued to be totally dominated by Freemasons ever since, for the sinister purposes we've just covered. And in 2010, the publication, the magazine Freemasonry Today, actually detailed the Masonic origins of the Royal Society. The members listed included people like Erasmus Darwin, who was coincidentally the grandfather of the guy who came up with the theory of evolution, and also people like James Watt, Joseph Priestley, Benjamin Franklin, and Masonic authors such as the aforementioned Albert Pint in the first half. And they have revealed that the teachings of Freemasonry are identical to those of the ancient Sumerian, Babylonian, and Egyptian mystery religions, as well as Judaism. Now, we're nearly there now, so fret ye not. I'm sure you're all anxious to get up and stretch your legs, whatever. There's not far to go now. So here's a quote from our old friend Albert Pike, who's been mentioned several times. He said, "The Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine." Yes, Lucifer is our God. Now, and the aforementioned James Watt, the guy I just mentioned, who invented the steam engine, for those who didn't know, was a member of the Somerset House Masonic Lodge in London, and Benjamin Franklin in 1734 became the Grand Master of the St. John's Lodge in Philadelphia. He was an American. Now, interestingly, Franklin, who I presume most of you heard of, Benjamin Franklin, he was also deeply involved in occult practices and was famously a member of the Hellfire Club in London, whose members were implicated in such heinous crimes as child and virgin sacrifices. And when Franklin's former London home was being renovated in the late 19th century, long after he died, by the way, several skeletons, all of which were children, horrifically, were discovered in the wall cavities. So these are the kind of people we're dealing with, these are the kind of people we're talking about. And the Hellfire Club was also infamous for its patrons' heavy drinking, which is a bit like the Porky Pint, really, and involvement in sex orgies, maybe not quite like Porky Pint. Well, I don't know, when it's a couple of times, maybe that.
Going about it, mate, it'd be alright.
35th term.
Yeah. So yeah, and black magic ceremonies, as well as members opening ridiculing of Christianity and mocking it as well. Now, Erasmus Darwin, as I say, the grandfather of Charles Darwin, was initiated into a Scottish lodge in 1788, and he was the author of a book called Zoonomia, in which he first proposed the evolutionary theory, which his grandson Charles eventually took up on and expanded upon. So in conclusion, I think it's time to wrap this up now. We've been going for hour and a half. So in conclusion, not only does Freemasonry hold a vice-like grip on all elements of society, anything that you can name comes under their influence. but it also totally pervades and is also the most prominent, almost to the point of exclusivity, within the Royal Society itself. And given that we now know that Freemasonry brings to bear all this undue influence upon the Royal Society, how can we trust whatever scientific decrees it decides to foist upon us and on society in general? The plain truth of the matter is that, unfortunately, we can't. And that is the end of that. Any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, any questions and
Or comments?
general discussion, comments, whatever you want?
Can I ask a question, please?
Of course you can.
I agree totally with you with flat earth, but I've only just come to that conclusion.
All right, okay.
And I love it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Brilliant,
love
isn't
it. I
it
love
makes much more sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's
Well,
what somebody got
I'm not
compared
convinced,
to,
but-
no, I love it, don't shoot me illusions. So if we're a flat earth, where are we?
Well, this is a very good question, and I can't answer it. I mean, what is out there? I mean, for anyone who doesn't know the flat Earth model, it's just it's like this table, and it's a disc. It's a round shape, and all around the edge of it is a 200-foot ice wall, which holds all the oceans in. Because that's one of the questions you always get asked as a flat Earther. Yeah, but why do all the oceans fall off the end then? It's because there's a 200-foot ice wall, and that's easily provable. Whatever direction you travel in, southwards, eventually you will hit the Antarctic ice
Is there
wall.
something to contain the gases as well?
Yes, although I was just going to come on to that. Yeah, no, sorry. And it is covered by some kind of a dome. It is believed. And I've actually seen videos. I don't know if you've seen videos on the internet of rockets hitting the dome.
Yeah.
No, and skidding along it and
No, just bouncing off it.
Called the firmament. So if there's no planet, do planets exist?
Well, again, I don't know. I don't think so. Have you ever seen? I can't speak specifically with planets, but have you ever seen photographs of stars through high-powered telescopes?
Oh, the twinkle,
Just Google that. It's just amazing. I mean, they don't look a bit like balls of gas. They just look like plasma to me.
Cymatics.
Yeah.
Cymatics is
Yeah,
the same as
exactly.
putting
Yeah.
beads on a speaker, it vibrates, it looks exactly the same.
So that's basically the flat Earth model. And honestly, I can't explain. I don't even pretend to try to explain what is outside that dome. But I'll tell you this. I've got a friend of a friend who I spoke to a couple of years ago, no less than that, and he is into astral traveling, right? Which I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah.
But where you can actually project yourself. And he said that he's been up right into the top of the dome, and he said, and all you can see when you look out through the dome at the universe or the solar system, whatever you want to call it, all you can see is it's like bubble wrap. He said it's just dome after dome after dome. So maybe there are other civilizations out there, but certainly the model of the universe that NASA presents us with, they're just layers.
Can I just say something? There is a simple thing that probably most people in this room have seen, and I've only just acknowledged that I've seen it so many times that
Right.
it just passed me by.
Yeah.
Which is when, before the sun sets, and you get some clouds, and the sun rays come through the clouds.
Yeah.
And they all come down at an angle like that.
Crepuscular rays. They call
And
it.
if you follow those up, they are definitely not going to be 93, 99
Exactly.
away.
It's triangular. It's just using
It's-
simple
So
triangulation.
you'll be able to find out how far the source of those rays are.
50 kilometers.
Right? You just answered the question.
50 kilometers.
Well, I've got let me just be the antagonist here, right? Just I've got my sort of like.
Hey, don't shatter my illusion.
Oh, we won't do it. We won't let it.
No, I just got to say, I think it's fantastic. This whole thinking outside the box of the reality that's being presented to us. It's almost too much for a lot of us, especially like scientific people. But just that one about the light. Whenever you see these rays, right, and I think I mentioned it when I grew up in Newcastle.
Did you?
They always like, it looks as if they're going down, but they will always emanate back to the source of the sun. So from me, the observer, to the sun, that they always go back to the sun. So it looks as if they're going there, but it's, my explanation is that they all go back to the sun.
If it was travelling 92 million miles, Chris, it would all be in a straight line.
It'd all be just.
By the time they hit us,
parallel.
it would be,
It would just be a parallel line.
Yeah, but from my perspective, they're going outwards. So
Yeah, but have you never heard of triangulation?
yeah, I have.
Well, that's how you can work out how far away it is.
Well, you have to consider Pythagoras
To
then,
think
don't
of it that us conspiracy theorists,
Yeah.
we are as fortune tellers. Because it's 6 months difference, isn't there, between a conspiracy theory and the truth.
Yeah,
And I think what's happened just recently is explained.
yeah. I mean, the truth is we don't know, do we?
Well, we don't know for sure.
We
no.
don't
I mean,
know.
I would never be
But
so
I
bold as
wouldn't
to say I
dispute. I wouldn't dispute that the measurements and that are taken cannot be disputed. That it's like flat, you know, the mathematics and everything, and there is this kind of ice wall. Whatever.
Chris,
But
why
there's another
can't you,
thing.
why
It
can't
could
you
be
fly
a-
that way around the earth? You can go that way.
Yeah.
Fly around the earth that way and that way. Why can't you go that way?
Exactly.
Well,
There's another point on that. Sorry, Chris. And then
Yeah.
if you're in an aeroplane
Yeah.
and you say you fly west and the Earth's flying towards you at 1,000 miles an hour, then surely that aeroplane would get there 1,000 miles an hour quicker.
All we need to do is hover. Just wait for
Can I ask a question on a different subject? Chris, we're going to have a real go at you tonight.
I think the main thing we're concerned about is the fact that these creations and myths or whatever are there to contain us and reduce our liberty.
Exactly.
Yeah, so what do we do? How do we disconnect from this and gain?
Well,
liberty?
I only have the ideas, it's up to you guys to make them work. Sorry, I'm just it's a good question. I honestly don't know. I mean, that is such a bloody $64,000 question, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I mean, all we can do, as far as I'm concerned, is just keep putting the message. Because eventually it will reach a tipping point. You know, since all this crap began a couple of years ago, the number of people who've woken up through it is just enormous, isn't it? And it'll just keep growing and growing and growing.
Do you not think it's absolute nonsense?
What?
What's going on at the moment?
Well,
It's by
I can't read it.
Bullshit.
It's by design, though.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Yeah. It's not by accident. No,
Who wrote that?
No, of course not. No.
Never has been.
This is the lead up to Agenda 21 2030, to lead up to their proposed new world order, and this is what they're doing.
So what you've been talking about tonight, right? When the mud floods, right?
Mud floods.
Yeah, for about 1,000 years. Was that in history? Have you seen that?
Yeah.
See the Portuguese gravestones in. I know it's
Oh,
only
yeah, you're
video.
talking about John Levi.
Yeah, it's only
Can I
video.
just say, we've quickly, sorry Paul, just before I go indeed, John's come up from Scarborough, and it'd be nice to contribute something in wherever it is. I'm suggesting £5 so that we can contribute to his travel costs, but also whatever's left over is going to the Porky Pint fund, save our vacancies. Another announcement is Paul is now opening on Thursdays, Friday, Saturdays, so if you're going up for a drink on a weekend, whatever, the pub needs to do business and it needs to stay alive and help you a little bit.
Put the food on, Chris. Is the food going back on?
Sorry?
Food or just drinks?
No, I think they're getting a barrel tomorrow, like,
Yeah. I'm saying I'm going to start doing
and then
food.
there'll be draft from here on.
No, food.
Food.
If anyone's interested, at a future day event, I will come and talk properly about flat Earth, and I think, you know, once we're not convinced of it, I think you'd be a positive on it.
You're not going to tell us what you're doing well.
Is it still live?
Britannica didn't say that in the 17th century.
I wouldn't bring this, a moment silence. I want to bring this podcast to an end, but it doesn't work if there's more than one person talking. It just sounds Terrible. So I'll finish the podcast in a minute or so. But is there any more, like, was there a final thing you wanted to say, Pete, or any more questions?
Yeah, just the only thing I'd like to say is that we've got a weekly podcast with John Hamer. It's on BitChute at the minute currently, and we talk about.
Well, the channel's called John Hamer Official, 3 separate words.
Makes it easy to find.
Can you send the link to Chris so he can?
We certainly can, yeah. We've
Pass
got,
it about.
we've got an email address as well, so if you want to.
Right, can you pass that to
Yeah.
Chris
Yeah, of
and then he can
course.
distribute it?
Right, so.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to do that, but if any of your, have you enjoyed it tonight?
Yeah.
So we all know the Freemasons are the good guys, and it's, no, okay, fine. So,
Yeah.
I don't know, is there any
That's great.
questions, any more questions?
No, that's okay. Well, I'll just bring the podcast to an end. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was just going to ask, what chance do you think we have of continuing to exist as human beings?
I think, personally, I think it's a very good chance. I am very, very optimistic that we will defeat these bastards.
He is, but I'll
Do you
back that up because he
Do
is
you
very
not think
optimistic.
during the war that they had the this thing called the not the revolution, the resistance? So they had the resistance during the war, right? And what I've looked into and how I've come about it, and a lot of it's been through life experience rather than research. Shit. The resistance. So the resistance carries on, and this is the resistance.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's all the resistance was. It was the people that didn't believe the bullshit. You know, because it's all lies.
Are any of you familiar with the 1983 series V?
Right.
Right. If you look at that, you'll see the parallels to this. I'm not saying that they are lizards, but let's face it, what the parallels to this are there. We are the
collaboration.
We are the resistance.
Why we got different blood types. And the thing is, you might only just have blood. You haven't just got different blood types. You've got different personalities. You've got different. Right? They're bred. We've been bred.
Are you going down the Anunnaki route?
No.
The Sumerian bloodlines?
No, I haven't seen anything.